Before I go into the topic of deep sea mining, which we know we're all eager to hear about, just a little bit about background about BCI, Blue Climate Initiative. So Blue Climate Initiative is actually a program of an organization called Tetiaroa Society, and there's a pretty interesting story there. Tetiaroa is actually an atoll in French Polynesia. You see that paradise picture on the upper left corner of my screen. That's basically the atoll of Tetiaroa, which is actually an atoll that Marlon Brando bought in the 1960s when he went to film Mutiny on the Bounty in French Polynesia. This atoll was preserved as a place of gathering of Polynesian royalty for centuries, and so has become really a model of environmental preservation since. The organization Tetiaroa Society was created to protect the island, to steward the island, and also to host scientific research on the island. Soon after that, there was also a hotel that was built, the Brando, kind of a model of green and a low carbon, zero carbon kind of hospitality that's won a lot of award-winning prizes. Also, it is a fairly high-end luxury hotel resort. And then over the years, visitors coming to the place, to the island, to the hotel, including some of the people you might look familiar on the bottom left corner of the screen there, kind of, suggested, well, the work you're doing here is great, but you're not going to save this island from drowning in the ocean if you don't work on a global scale. And that's how the idea of the Blue Climate Initiative came along, was to really take the action that was taking place around the atoll much more global, to work on ocean-based solutions to climate change, lever the power of the ocean to protect climate, looking both, kind of pursuing a triple objective of restoring the climate, as I just said, protecting the ocean, because we need that for the climate, along with a lot of other things on Earth as well, and then all the communities that are related to that, protecting and making communities more resilient. And we do that, BCI, through a variety of pathways. You see the actions kind of that are in this circle and this rainbow diagram there, whether it's policy work, which is kind of what this advocacy work we're engaged in right now is about, investment, education and outreach, under scientific, research, working with communities. So it's very varied. And some of the programs that we've done, we've conducted, some examples of what we've done in the past. So about 3 years ago, we brought together 60 scientists, kind of ocean experts in a variety of fields, from transport and energy all the way to nature-based solutions, including tourism and nutrition. And we asked them, if you had $1 million, what would you do to leverage the ocean to fight climate change? And we collected their recommendation into this menu of solutions. Some are already happening, some are about to happen, some maybe are a little bit more of a moonshot, as we say, or ocean shot. We collected that as in a publication that you can get from our website. And then soon after that, and kind of to start turning some of those into practice or to help accelerate them, we did a couple rounds of awards, of financing, one for community-based work, which ended up supporting 6 different programs in different regions of the globe around seaweed farming, reef protection and research, fisheries management, community-based fisheries management, and things like that. We also did more of a prize, kind of a $1 million prize for private sector initiatives, more technical solutions, which drew over 200 applicants. Eventually, we awarded 3 winners that all were working in the seaweed space, around plastics, bioplastics, feed, supplement for cattle, for methane reduction, as well as turning sargassum into hydrogen, kind of a processing of kind of waste processing and turning that into energy. We held a summit last year in French Polynesia where we brought a lot of these actors together, along with foundations and influencers and communities and indigenous leaders as well, cultural leaders. There was a big cultural component at that summit, and we'll keep on holding these events every couple of years or so going forward. And one theme that really came out of this event was the importance of protecting the ocean. And yes, the ocean, we need it and is useful and it's extremely powerful, but we're not going to have much of it if we can keep on going at the rate that we're going, and especially if we allow deep sea mining to happen. Which brings me really to the core of our time together today, is just seeing this as a looming major, the biggest threat we've ever seen to the ocean. And I'll pause here. I'm going to share with you guys a video, and I think I have to just really quickly redo my screen share to get the right Yeah, we're good. So I'm going to share a video just to introduce the topic in about 5 minutes, give you a break from me, and then we'll kind of go back into some of the themes that are raised in this video. So here we go. I hope everybody can hear.
On June 25th, 2021, the Pacific Island nation of Nauru triggered a rule that
Jeanne, I think just the sound is working, but you might have to share your video as well.
Regulations have been put in place.
Sorry, this did not work, the video. Okay. Oh, you're right. My bad.
No, all good.
Bad. Just a second. I was almost there.
On June 25th, 2021,
Thank you.
the Pacific Island nation of Nauru triggered a rule that would allow deep-sea mining to begin in 2 years, regardless of whether regulations have been put in place.
These mining companies are gearing up to put huge machines on the seabed floor and rip up the seabed floor.
The stakes are so high. When you've ruined the ocean, you've ruined life on Earth, effectively.
What was your reaction when you first heard about deep-sea mining?
Here we go again. We've already pushed the ocean to the absolute brink through overexploitation. We're now going to feed in an industrial activity under the water, and it may just be the thing that pushes the ocean over. It may be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
The deep sea is the lowest layer of the ocean. Below 1,800 meters, temperatures are cold, pressure is high, and life operates on longer timescales.
Almost every time we go in the deep ocean, we find new species. There's been scientific evidence that some deep-sea sponges can live for up to 11,000 years. Deep-sea corals, 4,000 years. So the ability of some of these organisms to recover their populations after they've been damaged are very limited.
Companies are interested in mining the seafloor for polymetallic nodules, rock-like formations that contain metals like nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. Polymetallic nodules form around fragments of debris on the seafloor, things like shark teeth. Over millions of years, metals from the seawater amalgamate around these fragments. When nodules are cut in half, you can see growth rings, like those on a tree. The role they play in the ocean's geochemistry and carbon cycle is only beginning to be understood.
There have been some research papers that have looked at whether there's an exchange of minerals between these polymetallic nodules and ocean water that actually moderate the chemical balance of the ocean in general, and that would affect its pH, its nutrient contents, and its livability for all the other creatures.
What can we expect deep-sea mining to look like?
So there's going to be a ship at the sea surface. That ship is going to lower a machine down onto the seabed. These are huge machines with traction wheels that are going to move along the seabed and hoover up these nodules. They're going to crush these nodules and send the crushed material through a riser up to the ship on the surface. They're going to be left with a lot of sediment that went up with the nodules, and they're going to pipe that back down again through another pipe. And they're being very cagey about where exactly they're going to release this, so we don't actually know. But in all likelihood, it's going to be in what they call the midwater zone, which is, from what we understand now, the most biodiverse part of the ocean. It's the area where all the economic fisheries take place, where food security for coastal communities takes place, where all the dolphins are and all the tuna fish are and the whales are. When that sediment comes out of that pipe in that midwater zone, it's going to disperse. It's going to create plumes. This mining is going to be going on 24/7. So there's been a continuous, non-stop plume of sediment particles being released into this midwater zone for up to, say, 30 years per mining operation. And there are multiple of these mining operations being envisioned. These little particles are really destructive to a lot of marine species. They get into their gills, get into basically what is their way of breathing. So the impact is not just going to be at the seabed, it's also going to be in this midwater zone. But even at the seabed, when these machines start moving along the seabed, they're going to kick up a whole bunch of sediment. There's huge plumes that develop around these huge machines. And this is not just going to be in the actual area that's been permitted for mining. These plumes get suspended into the water column, and there are currents in the water column which will take these plumes, they're thinking up to 100 kilometers out. So there will be a really large impact zone around the actual mining zone because of these sediment plumes, which are considered deadly to marine species.
Because the materials they want to mine can be used in electric car batteries, deep-sea mining companies have portrayed themselves as eco-warriors. But disturbing the seabed could be catastrophic for the climate. The deep sea is the largest active carbon sink on Earth. Stirring up sediment will release carbon back into the environment. It could damage the ability of the deep sea to sequester carbon and make the water more acidic.
Okay, that's a sobering video. Scary. But there are some responses to this, and I will get into this right now. So just kind of to summarize a little bit of what is deep sea mining. The map here kind of shows the different types of resource, and it sounds like you guys have talked about this already a little bit, so I'll try to go fast or just kind of really brief overview in terms of three types of mining resources. In the abyssal plain, you've got the polymetallic nodule, and the sea vents, you've got the polymetallic sulfides, and then the cobalt-rich crusts. The ones that are kind of the more accessible and probably the least costly to get to are the polymetallic nodules. That's why we hear a lot about those by the mining companies and the policymakers, and especially one area out of the Clarion-Clipperton zone you've heard between Hawaii and Mexico is where the richest concentration of these nodules are. These nodules, you see a picture on the left there, are kind of considered or some people, some pro-mining agents are kind of talking about, a battery in a rock, because it's got cobalt, nickel, manganese, and it also has copper, which is kind of needed for the broader electrical world industry. A lot of these resources, there are some resources that are in national waters, but a lot of them are in international waters and what we call the areas beyond national jurisdiction. Those waters are governed by a body called the International Seabed Authority, which operates a bit like the UN, because a UN-like organization with 167 countries, I think, are now sitting on it. Interestingly enough, the US is not a signatory. This body was created in response to, in 1994, the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea that was endorsed. And the signatory countries to this became, seating members of the ISA. Again, the US chose to kind of be its own agent and not to report to a larger body. So they kind of do what they want, although they have been sitting as an observer at the ISA until now. I also have at the bottom here kind of some names of the more prominent mining companies that have a very strong lobby and communication campaigns around deep sea mining. So a lot of these already have exploratory licenses, but not mining licenses per se. But they've been active in the space, both in terms of the research and the exploration, but also in terms of lobbying and engagement with policymakers on the topic, both in international waters through the ISA as well as certain domestic waters. Some of the countries that are on the domestic side that are really pushing forward are Cook Islands, has kind of quite advanced in that area, and so is Norway, are kind of some of the countries that are the most stronger proponents of that and are advancing that in their national waters. This is a little bit more about what it is, kind of the three types. I'll skip this, really. It's just the three types of environments where you can find minerals and what it looks like. So the question now is, should we do it? Do we need those? Do we really need those minerals does it justify us going to the bottom of the sea to get them and destroying everything in the process, or some of it in the process? So I'm going to go through four kind of pillar arguments and rationales as to why we don't need or shouldn't do this. I'm going to go through these four kind of main arguments clockwise, starting in the upper left, talking about the environmental work. I'll go very quickly because we've already heard the video talk extensively about that. There's also interesting from the indigenous perspective and how they stand about this issue. There's strong governance problems associated with the ISA. I'll talk about that briefly. And then also more interestingly, really going to, well, do we really need them? And are there any alternatives to going down there? And what we are calling really greenwashing by the companies. On the environmental side, just rattling through those because you've heard them in the video, the habitat destruction, just to highlight in the case of the nodules, these nodules who are on average 4 million years old, are sitting on these abyssal plains, which are kind of sediment plains. Life can only really attach to the nodules. So the biology that's down there that's maybe not dense, but extremely diverse, are hanging on and are reproducing, are using these nodules to basically anchor themselves on because the sediments themselves that's around it do not host life the same way that the nodules do. So they really are a concentration of biodiversity and play a critical role in the development of that biodiversity. The plumes, you've heard plenty of that, obstructing respiratory, but also communication functions for those deep ocean animals, who are maybe communicating with light, by light. The pollution as well that can come from the sound, noise, and the light pollution and affect behavior patterns. Carbon pump, you've heard about that as well in the video. I won't go into more details here. And then those plumes that are released also would naturally have heavy metals on them. They've been part of their issue. They're coming out of processing of nodules, and they will be carrying heavy metals that could then be ingested by the fauna, which then could be ingested by humans. So there could be a really undesirable heavy metal effect there that could be going on, and toxins that come with it. And then also something more recently that was found is that it turns out that those nodules might actually have some alpha radiation, which could be extremely dangerous to health as well. Scientists, over 750 scientists have already kind of come together to stand against deep sea mining, expressing their concerns about this. And then this next slide here, same thing, this illustrates a little bit more what we have been talking about in the video and my list above, and then this is just a bit more of a visual of the same topics. So the second argument is what I'm pushing here, or kind of elevating here, is really the voices of indigenous leaders, especially coming from the Pacific, but now others have also joined them from other continents, to basically speak to the fact that this work would not have the free and prior informed consent of indigenous people. This is, some language that is often inserted in multilateral agreements around nature protection in various forms. And I have a statement here, cultures across the Pacific consider the ocean to be sacred space of creation, a provider, an ancestor, and a link to places and people across the horizon. It's basic for them, they see it as an origin of life, really. And it really is in terms of how Earth biology works. So there's a petition out there. There's over 72 indigenous groups from over 50 countries who've joined, and we encourage people to keep on spreading the word. The petition welcomes both indigenous representatives as well as allies of those. So always something good to share. This is really the one movement that's come around. The third pillar I wanted to talk to is really the governance issues, and this can get a little bit more complex, but just briefly, the ISA does not report to the UN. It's its own body. It's got kind of three key chambers here: the Legal and Technical Commission, LTC, you see up there, that has 41 individuals, and that's it. And it turns out that Legal and Technical Commission has a lot of power and influence in the decision making of in theory, at least on paper, the way that the documentation is written about the way it's framed is that whatever recommendation, let's say to issue a license that the LTC would recommend, the council, which is really the voting decision maker body of the larger ISA, could not counter that recommendation, or it would be very difficult for them to counter the recommendation. And it's basically two voices, the way that the voting system and the council are in buckets of sometimes only 4 countries. And you would need a majority in each bucket to counter recommendation from the LTC, which means that in a bucket of 4, two government voices who are pro recommendation from LTC would be enough to prevent the council from countering any recommendation from the LTC. So I'm getting very technical here, but basically it's to say that it is extremely, the power is really in the hands of the LTC, and it's very hard for the 36 larger states, let alone the 167, assembly size, to really be able to stand up. So there's a lot of right now legal battles and negotiations within the ISA debates for how to handle if the application were to come for a license, how the ISA would be able to respond. And there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of different interpretation of the written language because of how complex it is and sometimes skewed it is. Another problem here is that the ISA itself is doubly, and it's really a case of the fox guarding the chicken coop. The ISA is the one that's is basically the main body supposed to protect the high seas, but it's also the ones that depends on licenses for its revenues. So for its reasons for exist is really to issue licenses, and that's how it gets its income. So there's a conflict of interest within the ISA. And then there's also an imbalance in power. Like who are the countries that have, or companies that have those licenses? Who can afford to go down to the bottom of the deep sea and actually get value out of those? And this is the common human heritage of humankind. And there's also an issue of these sponsoring states that are proponent who have decided to be proponent of deep sea mining. There's a case of Nauru that's mentioned in the video. This is a very, very small state that would not have the capacity to monitor a contractor who's mining on their behalf, let alone to enforce any regulations, should there be ever regulations that are environmentally suitable. So there's another extreme challenge there in terms of how this operates. It has, in terms of as a result, a lot of countries are standing up and taking a stance on deep sea mining for a moratorium or precautionary pause or even a ban. So in the last year and a half, 23 countries, the latest one being the UK last week, announced their position, kind of standing against deep sea mining. So it's still not the majority of the 167 country members of the ISA, but it's a growing and very powerful number of countries that have a lot of influence. There's also some parliamentarians and multilateral groups, and closer to the US, there's 3 states, the western states of the US. This is more in their own waters and in the territorial waters, who have also taken a stand. Again, this is more of a symbolic stand because there's not always a huge amount of deep sea mineral resources within those waters, but it's still kind of at least a political stand against. But the U.S. is not, just to go back to the previous slide, the U.S. is not one of the members who have taken, or members or non-members for that purpose of the ISA, who have taken a stand on it. And there's been a lot of push from advocacy organizations to try to get them to do that, but we're not quite there yet. This is just some examples of some of the criticism that the ISA has been under from member states and media because of their operations. And then this brings me to the 4th point that I want to talk about is, do we really need those metals? And for some of us, we really see this now more and more as a greenwashing. Yes, in the past, historically, lithium batteries that most EV in the past have relied upon were needing nickel and cobalt, and that's been kind of the story that's been carried on by the pro-mining lobby. However, we are saying that the technology is evolving, and just to kind of follow my logic I'm putting here in this slide, these critical minerals, especially cobalt, nickel, manganese, the market growth of these minerals are and have been dependent on the growth, or been driven by the growth of EV batteries. So if the EV chemistry batteries, or the demand from EV batteries for these critical metals changes, then the demand, the broader market demand for these metals will also evolve, will be effective. So the EV industry is really driving the demand for these minerals. So if we can show the changes in trend in the EV sector and the battery for EV sector, then that is a significant signal as to what the trend would be for nickel and cobalt, and manganese to some extent as well. One point here I'm putting, so we've been quite actively pushing for the LFP which is a lithium iron phosphate battery, which is kind of a slightly newer generation, and it's come on board a few years ago, has been very proponent of the technology in China. Does not use neither cobalt nor nickel nor manganese at this point in stage. They have captured a very big share of the market. So from under 10% share of the EV market and 5 years ago, it's grown to 30% last year. And a lot of companies continue to invest, including in the US, in factories that are manufacturers LFPs. Sodium ion is another battery that's catching a lot of interest because that also offers a replacement from lithium. Although those batteries might have a little bit of nickel and cobalt, but a lot less than the traditional batteries that have been used in the past. So basically, and another interesting point here is that in the past, the mining industry, the land mining industry, if we think of it, has been driven by a very old-fashioned, steel industry that is not very innovative, that is not very dynamic. Now it's different. The story is different. The main market for this mining industry is a lot more dynamic. It's a lot more innovative. So if there is a bottleneck in the supply of one raw material, very quickly the downstream market will evolve, and this is exactly what's happening. The battery chemistry innovator, there's nickel and cobalt are expensive and controversial to come by, where we're going to change our solution. Same thing with lithium, although lithium is less of a deep sea mining issue. So the market, the slightly downstream market for minerals is a lot more dynamic, a lot more innovative than it has been in the past. And that's the point, kind of the point that this quote at the bottom of the slide here is saying. We talk a lot more about this in a paper that Blue Climate Initiative actually published last week. That explains a lot of these points. So I encourage you to have a look at it. You can click or scan the QR code here. You'll be given, I think, a copy of this slide, so you can look at it later. There's another paper that came out today in Nature that's also argumenting about the business case. And just to go a little bit more into some of these arguments, I mentioned the different battery chemistries. I mentioned LFP and sodium ion. There's others here listed that are also getting interest from and already getting investment from commitments from various car companies. Recycling is also more and more of a reality. If we think of it, the first generation batteries are going to start retiring soon, and that will be an intake of metals. And yes, it will. We can only grow as long, the share of the recycling sector can only grow as long as the market itself grows, and we know we're limited by but that it is growing so fast that there's a chance that the intake from recycling is also going to eventually grow, not so far behind the EV market itself. Also, policies, of course, the U.S. is driving a lot of investments. We're seeing the IRA has turned into a lot of investment into new battery chemistries as well as recycling. EU also has strong supportive policies in that regard. And so this comes to actually what's interesting is from the demand side, more and more companies are signing on and making a public statement that they're not going to be sourcing minerals, or not going to include deep sea minerals in their value chain. So they're basically pulling the rug from under the feet of the mining companies. 8 car manufacturers, BMW, Rivian, Volkswagen, Volvo, Ford, Renault, and others, tech companies as well. You see their names. So all of those are already taking a stance that they're not going to be using those metals. Financial corporations as well are eliminating this from an option in their financing models. Major investors are pulling out of mining. They're seeing it as a dangerous, both commercially and ethically dangerous investment. Maersk, Lockheed has pulled out of their licenses that they had. These are some of the brands here. This is a little bit more kind of a summary of the different movements, whether it's the states, the indigenous leaders, the scientists, civil society organizations. I'm going to share this slide here. So BCI is a part of a coalition of over 100 civil society organizations that are kind of housed under an umbrella organization called Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. It's a great platform where you can get more resources about deep sea mining after you've checked out the BCI website. So you can look at that. And then in terms of turning it over to you now, in terms of taking action, what can we all do? What can you do after hearing this, to try to make a difference? There is calling on government, whether it's local government or national governments or your corporations. There's a lot that can be done. The links, have some links here. So I mentioned the DSCC, Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, has a good platform there where you can have a portal to all of these different actions depending on the nature of the entities. Also from the representatives, there's another link here for finding what are your representatives. Individuals can sign petitions. I've put 3 here, including the one that BCI is hosting, which is more of the one driven towards indigenous audiences and their allies. The companies, so your companies can support a moratorium, whether they are a downstream consumer of these metals or not. You know, they all can take a stance. Of course, the bigger the company, the bigger the brand, and the more likely they are to use those metals or choose not to use those metals, I should say, the more powerful their names are out there in the movement. And also in terms of investing, you know, the choices that you make, and you know what, this is why last year I chose to buy a Ford over a Toyota, and my last hybrid, my first hybrid car, I made a choice exactly for that. So there's definitely looking at what brands, what vehicle brands have taken a statement can really influence and it should influence the consumer market. Educate yourself. Again, you know, on this side, there's a lot of materials, and I'm going to share some more at the end of this slide. Read our paper. There's some posts here on whether it's X, Facebook, LinkedIn that you can repost about this. And then of course I'm putting the pitch here about, you know, gathering support if you have access or know people who have access to financial resources to commit to these to this type of work, and always encouraging that as well. At the end of this slide, well, first of all, thank you for your from the bottom of the sea, from bottom of my sea, for listening. I'm adding here too, there's a few more resources that will come through with some references around the different kind of topics and pillars I've talked about. And that's it for me. So thanks so much for your attention, and I'm excited to hear your questions.